Welcome back to Underground Strategy Podcast. This week we are continuing with part 2 on Louis Botha. Enjoy. We have been mentioning the Boer War and we have been mentioning World War I because he has been working through both of these. How is his role? Because you mostly hear about him in the Boer War. You rarely hear about him in the First World War. Why is that?
Another good question. So he is famous for the Boer War, and as I think we're going to title this episode, is he South Africa's General Washington? I don't know. Let's see. But I think you're right about that, about him being overshadowed in the First World War, and I think a lot of it is how South Africa placed the history afterwards. I think because he had passed away when he did, because Jan Smuts had a much longer career, and also because the extreme right, the nationalists took over at different points, but then especially in the end of the 1940s, and so a lot of the histories weren't put forward. The idea of having a strong Commonwealth British connection was definitely not a good thing. And so I think that's a part of it. So a part of why it's not as well known. But you're right about what you'd mentioned earlier, that many times you have politicians saying many things. Maybe many of them had served too. But in this case, you had in the same person the prime minister. So by the time of the First World War, he had established independence for the Transvaal. So after the Anglo-Boer War, essentially the Transvaal and the Free State become colonies of Britain. And slowly he starts working with Britain, Jan Smuts and a number of people, and independence is achieved for the Transvaal, later the Free State. And then South Africa is formed as a dominion of Britain in 1910.
But now he has basically transitioned from a wartime leader to a peacetime leader.
Very much so, and this also is in part of the commando tradition, that your generals would also be politicians, and they would also later be your president, or etc. So there was a very fine line in that world, It wasn't there wasn't a division between military and political, but absolutely at this time he becomes a statesman, and by 1914 he says, right, well we're supporting Britain. So just 12 years after the war ends with the Anglo-Boer War, he's now fighting for the British, and this does not sit well with many South Africans, especially not Boer Republicans. Even today, there are very strong feelings, and so I approach this topic with respect and cautiously, because we're not praising what's done, we're only speaking academically about the past. And at this point, as you've mentioned, there's a rebellion we start the campaign in modern Namibia, but at that point it was called German Southwest Africa, and really the wheels come off. The Union Defence Force is not well equipped, well trained, no staffing system, a few question marks around logistics, and then also there's a mutiny and a rebellion. Well, maybe let's say rather more rebellion, a couple of minor mutiny and then some rebellion. Botha then takes command with Jan Smuts as his second in command, who happened to be the Minister of Defence. He had taken a number of portfolios, Minister of Defence, mines, etc. He was a brilliant mind, but at this point, everything's put into quelling the rebellion, into the war machine, and Botha deploys himself to the field, fighting, and it really breaks his heart. Tactically, they were brilliant, though they were good, but it breaks his heart he's really an emotional person, and he's found crying on one of the battlefields after one of the battles, and he sees his own people dead. But he continues. He has to continue, and then in Southwest Africa, he leads the campaign. Of course, he's holding the political office, so he's in his correspondence. You see, it's always discussion about cabinet, about what's happening with this and that, and relations with Britain. But he leads himself in Southwest Africa, and he really does the campaigns, or after the re-invasion in the start of 1915, the campaign ends in approximately 6 months. They are advancing. It's really amphibious landings in a number of areas, slow build up, and then he leads the northernmost advance, and eventually, we won't go into all the details, but eventually encircles those forces with really mobile groups of Boers. Big logistical questions they have to solve in this campaign, but he's really there, making sure things are going on. And of course, Jan Smuts takes command of the Southern Army, but at this point, there's a number of contextual points also. A much bigger force that they have, the South Africans, compared of only 5,000 Germans, and maybe a bit less, and South Africa can muster 40,000-50,000, but they have to cross this massive desert, arid area, and then at the end, the force sizes were almost equal, but they managed to envelop the Germans. And Botha is very much his hands on all of it, right? Of course, great staff system, great supporters, great soldiers. When I say great, they were good, right, for this kind of terrain and this kind of fighting. There were problems between the different doctrines of the British system and the Boer system. There was challenges with the logistics, certainly, and with the approaches. So there was still infighting, but nonetheless, 6 months later, by July 1915, the campaigns won the first Dominion-led campaign victory, and the Brits love him, and they just think, this guy has just sealed the deal for us. He's just nailed it. And his victory and campaign victory is great. He's put the political results afterwards. That's another story.
You have this very passionate man, and he brings more or less only success wherever he goes. But he's also, he's, I don't know how to put it, but he's flexible enough to be successful, but he is still more or less true to his ideals, which is kind of unique, because usually it becomes the other way around eventually with war, especially with wartime leaders. But you're mentioning also, and you hear these guys, these are like, these guys stick together, Botha and Smuts. So you always hear them. It's almost like in most of the reading you do, you cannot read about one of them without reading about the other. And you mentioned Smuts here, and that he was Minister of Defense, and he is more seen like a strategist, maybe a more intellectual kind of guy. Am I right there?
Yeah. Oh, certainly. Very intellectual. Went to Stellenbosch University. Went to Cambridge afterwards. Graduated with top honors. So certainly a formidable brain. He would do feats like he would ask people when they challenged him on it, to read a number of pages, and he would then stop them and he would recite it to them. So in terms of memory, in terms of analysis, very brilliant man.
He was a brain power guy.
Yeah.
But how were their relationships? Like, were they friends, and did they get along well? I mean, obviously well enough to have epic results.
So as people, they loved each other professionally. It's a bromance. But they weren't. So both of them had kind of, let's put it this way, they weren't drinking buddies, if you know what I mean. So it was a formal relationship. Their families knew each other. There was a lot of love and consideration and sending things, and Botha would check on later on when Smuts went to the East for the East African campaign. He would write to Smuts' wife to check on her and send information. And at one point, there's a funny letter where he says he's grumpy about the manager, the farm manager on Smuts' place, and he says to Smuts, "I've now decided, because you're not here, you must fire this farm manager immediately. He's making things unnecessarily difficult for your wife, and he won't accept it." And he says, and also cancel, the tree contract you have, so you have nothing more. So very protective, very caring, very patriarchal kind of style. And they were great friends. But their love was always for the work, and they were obsessed. They worked day in and day out with, very not mature, immature. I don't want to say immature, it's not the right word, but the systems were still professionalizing, military, politically, etc. And so they worked around the clock to do that. Yeah, Smuts was good. He did good work during the Anglo-Boer War, a little bit smaller groups and a little bit more during the guerrilla phase, so maybe less of that conventional experience. And he's received a lot of critique for his East African campaign. Some of it fair, some of it maybe unfair. I think he has done some good work there too. And then between the two, there was a lot of strong collaboration. But Botha was the boss, right? Like it was pretty clear. He was not only being older from that certain tradition, and Smuts. I mean, he always fancies himself a little bit, and he's a smart. They call him Slimjan or Slimjan is Smuts in South Africa. Slim meaning smart or sly or something like this, So he's always got some sort of plan. But with Botha, it was clear. What I can do is I can pull something up here. It's an extract from one of the letters, and this is where Botha's in Southwest Africa. Smuts is coming up from the headquarters to lead the southern forces, and I'll just give a small reading about it. And it says, Yanni, so that's an affectionate way to refer to Smuts. Yanni, this is an amazingly big country in which to wage war. I have given much attention to all the plans of invasion and attack, and especially your plan to advance in the south of Sierheim. May I hope that you will allow me to give you a little advice. Allow me first to assure you warmly of my delight that you are coming to take command in the south. Now, as regards your plan, it is definitely wrong. Where you want to go in, smaller commando groups should go in. It will cost too much in transport, and Van Dierventer and Celliers are sufficient for that. You should come directly to Luderitzburg. Form 2 wings out of the cavalry now under Mackenzie in one brigade, and let Mackenzie take command of them alone. He does not understand infantry, and should be head of a smaller mounted force only. You then take command over him and the others in the south, and after ours is occupied, you will have a big open country for operations. After such a movement, Sierheim, Kalkfontein, Walmbad, and the outlying places must fall of themselves, and then you are in a position to do a great deal of important work. It will help me tremendously, for if the enemy is really concentrating near me, I shall soon be in a very serious fight. You must telegraph me your final invasion plan. So that's a letter he writes to Smuts, and it's very clear that he's the one saying, whoa, stop, think about this.
I mean, it's very straightforward, it's very honest, and they didn't beat around the bush like that, even if they did it in a polite way.
He didn't, and ironically, it would be Botha the one that got upset with Smuts for, just for even mentioning something small. He even goes on a rant about, why did you send this letter through all the clerks? If you want to rap me over the knuckles, don't do it. So he was very emotional. He would never, not publicly, but he would confide later on. But that's not to be misunderstood also. So you're right, it was direct, it was honest, but he loved Smuts, and he was very clear if something happened to him, Smuts was going to take over command. So it was like a personal discussion between two friends over there that unfortunately with history and with time, we now access, right, for good or bad. And if you know what I mean. So it kind of shows a bit of a moment between them, but we don't say that that's the whole sum of their relationship, because Smuts was brilliant and competent as a commander.
And I think, just to have a glimpse of this, it's kind of beautiful, because this is not something you see today, because it's everything is so formalized. You shouldn't have personal relations. So of course, it happens, of course, that military commanders and leaders form that, but this is different, and I approve. It's fair. And how do you think, because you have these two legends, right? And I will call them legends, and I will say both of them. How do you think, or they must have shaped South Africa's military landscape influenced it quite heavily for generations to come. And can you see something of this even today? Or, you have served, and can you still see the influence of these two men?
The legacy is there. The Union Defence Forces was the first amalgamated force in South Africa, and it was the Boer tradition that came in, and there was the British colonial tradition that were put together. Of course, this went through many iterations, so I don't want to oversimplify it. But a lot of their personal memories were kind of pushed to the side when the nationalists took over in half of the 20th century. And then, with the formal apartheid system, a lot of the ideas of Botha and Smuts wasn't really, because they were pro-British, etc., or at least cast as that. It was pushed to the side. But the defense force still had those same roots, even today, as you mentioned. I mean, of course, we're not going to see a Boer on his horse, going there, but there are concepts that are very similar, of course, and that's to do with the mobile approach. It's common in different countries. We might call it a maneuver approach. There's similarities in terms of maybe not. I'm not talking about force design now, but in South Africa, we don't really like to take a lot of casualties before we will withdraw. With our current conflict in the east of Congo, let's see, the numbers are creeping up. But, in Central African Republic, in Bangui, I think there were 30 casualties, maybe 13 dead, up to 15, maybe of injuries afterwards. Of course, South Africans, the force there fought tremendously and took out maybe 900 of the Seleka rebels. But after that mission, I mean, the whole force withdrew. So anyway, so there's a tradition there where we don't take a lot of or don't want to take a lot of casualties. Doesn't maybe answer your question about force design, but I'm just throwing it in. And then I think that the languages, so things being in Afrikaans and English, it really carried all the way through up until around about 1994 with the integration of the liberation forces, the struggle, MK, UPLA, non-statutory forces, and then it was English as the official language, and there still is tribal elements in terms of units associated with certain groups, but under that there very much is still a lot of Afrikaans used. So I would say that language element up until 1994 in English and Afrikaans being used, it is a remnant. And then also, I think they gave a certain standing to South Africa in just in pure military and pure geopolitical terms here. So I'm not speaking about the oppression of people and all the negative things that happened and needs to be accounted for. But it puts South Africa on the map. And suddenly you're part of the victors of the First World War. You're at, the peace talks, etc. And you're a global player. And South Africa's economy becomes stronger and stronger, of course, not directly impacted by the war and all that. And slowly, so there's that they've brought to it. And then, of course, the force takes a number of different shapes, over the years. It never becomes a massive army. And that tradition kind of stays, that it has a couple of limited objectives, never to, become too big or too unwieldy, often to its own detriment. But that may be a start to the answer, and we can get some letters in from people who will keep me right.
No, I think it's an excellent answer. A part of the legacy is also the mindset, because that is exactly what you're talking about. Because, of course, tactics, operational things, they always evolve with time, but it's a mindset. And like when you're saying taking casualties, for example, that is actually a mindset that you don't see that often today, because we have become more and more prone to do that, as an example. So I think the whole mindset has put a permanent left a permanent mark in a positive way.
Yeah,
I would say. So I think we're gonna start to round up this session. It's been a great session, Tony. You've been answering questions for 50 minutes, and you have been doing a great job. It was very interesting to sit on the other side and to just listen. It's been like a private lecture. So I had really enjoyed this.
Oh no, that's great. Yeah, I mean, very happy to talk about it. We can put a couple of links into the show notes. Shamelessly promoting some of my own works and co-authored works. And yeah, any last questions before we call it, Max, or is that it for us today?
I think this is it for us today, and I think this is something we definitely have to revisit. And I know that we are having plans on doing a limited series on just this, and together with Ian, your co-author, and really dig even deeper in to this for anyone who is interested. But for me, this is great. This is a lot to digest, and I'm super happy. Anything more from you?
No, for me, delighted to be able to speak about the subject today, about Louis Botha as an extension of our one theme, military legends, as you've mentioned, Max. And if anyone has any suggestions for a military legend that they want to speak about or that they want to suggest, please ping us a line and we'll be happy to look at it. Last words to you, Max.
Thank you so much for listening in, tuning in to us. We will have a new episode next week, and you can always find us on undergroundstrategy.com, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So ping us, email us, DM us, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.